Hundreds of Harleys descended on Elm Street, forming an iron wall around the Davis family's small house. Trapped inside the perimeter was Deidre Gable, a county code enforcer who had just smashed a 9-year-old boy's lemonade stand and called Child Protective Services on his desperate parents. She thought she was just enforcing an ordinance. What she didn't know was that the boy, Leo, had given a free cup of lemonade to a Hell's Angel named Reaper hours earlier, and now Reaper's entire brotherhood was here to teach Mrs. Gable about a different kind of code enforcement. Before we dive deeper into a story that will shake your faith in the system but restore it in humanity, I need to know, where are you watching this from? What corner of the world are you in right now? Drop your city and your country in the comments below. Let's see how far this beacon of hope can truly travel. Your voice matters. Help us get this channel to 1,000 subscribers. God bless you for joining the family. His name was Leo, and he was 9 years old, but in the hollowed-out suburbs of Toledo, Ohio, 9 was old enough to know the smell of fear. It smelled like the antiseptic hallways of the county hospital and the stale coffee on his father's breath. Leo wasn't fighting for a new bike or a video game. He was a small warrior in worn-out sneakers, fighting for a heartbeat. His sister, 6-year-old Maya, had a hole in her heart, a cruel lottery ticket drawn at birth. The doctors called it a rare, congenital defect. The insurance company, in a letter full of words Leo didn't understand, called it investigative. And investigative, Leo had learned, was a corporate word for no. They needed $40,000, or Maya's clock would just stop. We've all felt that chill, haven't we? That moment the system, the machine, tells you no, and you realize you're just a number. Before we dive deeper into Leo's story, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. Let's see how far this fight for Maya reaches. Leo's parents, Mark and Sarah, were ghosts haunting their own home. The local auto parts factory, the one that had employed Mark for 15 years, had shuttered its doors, moving south of the border, leaving a community of broken families in its wake. They were good people, the kind who paid their taxes and mowed their lawn, but they were drowning in a sea of medical debt and bureaucratic indifference. Their home, once filled with the sound of laughter, was now choked by a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the click of a keyboard as Sarah searched for charities, or the mumbled curses from Mark as he was put on hold. Again, they were fighting a phantom, a call center in another state, an algorithm that had weighed Maya's life against a balance sheet and found it wanting. They had exhausted their savings, their 401k, their pride. They had appealed, been denied, appealed again. They were trapped in the beige-carpeted prison of American healthcare, and the walls were closing in, stealing the very air they breathed. This was the Rust Belt, a place where the skeletons of industry pierced the skyline like broken teeth. Leo Street was a map of quiet desperation. Cracked sidewalks, overgrown weeds, houses where the paint was surrendering to the humid Ohio summer. This was a town that felt forgotten by the rest of the country, a place where dreams came to die. The air itself felt heavy, thick, with the humidity and the collective sigh of 1,000 broken promises. People here were too busy trying to keep their own heads above water to notice a small boy setting up a card table on the corner of Elm and 3rd. They were surviving, not living, and survival makes you blind. Leo watched his parents fade. He saw his father, a man who used to swing him onto his shoulders, now struggling to meet his son's eyes. He heard his mother's quiet sobs in the bathroom, muffled by a towel, and in his 9-year-old heart, a cold, hard resolution formed. He would not stand by. He would not be helpless. His innocence was his shield, but his love for his sister was his sword. He didn't understand deductibles or coverage gaps. He only understood that Maya needed him. He grabbed his old red flyer wagon, the one with the squeaky wheel, and marched to the garage. He was going to war. His arsenal was pitiful, but it was all he had. A ceramic piggy bank emptied onto his bedroom floor yielded $18.50 in sticky quarters, dimes, and a few crumpled bills from his birthday. He rode his bike to the corner store and bought sugar, lemons, and a pack of plastic cups. He found an old card table in the basement, its legs wobbly and uneven. His mother, her eyes red-rimmed, watched him with a fresh wave of heartache. She wanted to tell him it was impossible, that the world was too cruel for 50-cent miracles, but she couldn't. She couldn't break the last pure thing in their house. He took a black marker and a piece of cardboard ripped from a shipping box. His handwriting was shaky, the letters big and uneven. Lemonade 50C, it read, and underneath, he poured out his entire soul in 6 words that screamed louder than any siren. Money for my sister's surgery. He didn't know how to spell surgery, but it didn't matter. The plea was universal. He taped the sign to the front of the wobbly table, a proud banner for his one-boy army. He set his jar of cloudy lemonade sweating in the heat and waited. He was a tiny island of hope in an ocean of apathy. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the asphalt. The humidity was a wet blanket, choking the air. Cars rushed past, a blur of tinted glass and indifference. The drivers, locked in their air-conditioned capsules, were late for work, stressed about their own bills, lost in their own lives. They glanced at the sign maybe, but it didn't register. It was just more static, another piece of urban decay. Leo's heart, so full of hope just an hour before, began to shrink. He felt invisible. He was a ghost on his own street corner, watching the world speed by, unseeing. 2 hours passed. The ice in his pitcher had melted, watering down his product. He had made $4. He did the math in his head. The number was so big, so astronomical, it made his stomach hurt. $40,000. He felt a hot, shameful sting behind his eyes. He blinked it back. Hard. He was a soldier. Soldiers don't cry. But the vastness of his task, the sheer, crushing weight of that number was settling onto his small shoulders. Each car that passed felt like a door slamming shut. Another no, in a world that only said no. But Leo was wrong about one thing. He wasn't invisible. You see, the universe has a strange way of balancing its books. And true, unfiltered goodness, the kind Leo was bleeding onto that sidewalk, it creates its own gravity. It pulls things toward it, and as the sun reached its brutal peak, it was about to pull in something the town hadn't seen in a long time. It was about to attract the attention of the very last people you'd ever expect to be angels. Because down the street, a different kind of storm was brewing. One not of clouds, but of chrome and steel. The sound arrived first. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical presence, a deep, guttural, earth-shaking rumble that rattled the windows of the closed-down storefronts and vibrated up through the soles of Leo's sneakers. It was the sound of 100 angry gods clearing their throats. It was the signature anthem of the American outcast. A Harley-Davidson, chopped and raked, was idling at the red light right next to Leo's stand. It was a machine built for intimidation, all blacked-out chrome and raw, exposed engine, and the man riding it was carved from the same unforgiving material. He was huge, a mountain of black leather and denim, even sitting down. His name was Reaper. He hadn't been called by his given name in 20 years, not since he'd traded one uniform for another, swapping his Marine Corps dress blues for the colors of the Hells Angels. His cut, the sleeveless leather vest, was his new flag, adorned with patches that told a story of loyalty, violence, and a life lived on the absolute edge. His arms were sleeves of ink, histories of pain and brotherhood tattooed into his skin. A thick beard covered a jaw that looked like it was set in concrete, and his eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, had seen things that would make a priest faint. He was, by every societal definition, the villain. The oppressive Ohio heat was hell on air-cooled engines. Reaper's iron head was running hot, sputtering in protest at the long red light. He could feel the waves of heat rising from the cylinders, cooking his right leg. He was frustrated, sweating through his shirt, and in no mood for this town's judgment. He felt the stares. A woman in the car next to him conspicuously hit her power lock button. Click. He heard it over the idle of his bike. He was used to it. He was the monster they told their kids about. The living embodiment of the other, the failure of the American dream. This was his world. He wasn't just a man. He was a symbol, a walking, breathing, keep out sign. Cops tailed him for miles, waiting for a broken tail light. Mothers pulled their children closer when he walked into a convenience store. He was the 1%, the outlaw, the bogeyman who lived just on the edge of polite society, a reminder that the wild, untamed frontier still existed, and in this moment, he was just a man with an overheated motorcycle, stuck in a dying town, being stared at by a little boy at a lemonade stand. He was about to turn away, to ignore the kid, like he ignored everyone. But then he saw her, a woman in a crisp county uniform, driving a pristine white van, pulling up to the curb with an air of self-important authority. This was Mrs. Deidre Gable, the county code enforcer. Reaper knew the type, small people who loved the taste of even smaller power. He watched, his engine thumping a slow, angry rhythm, as she got out of her van, clipboard in hand. He saw her march up to the 9-year-old boy. He saw her point at the sign. He saw her face twist in a mask of bureaucratic scorn. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the language of tyranny. He watched her lecture the boy, her finger jabbing the air. He saw Leo's shoulders slump. He saw the boy's face, which had been set in such grim determination, begin to crumple. He saw the tears well up, hot and fast, as the woman berated him. This tiny soldier, who had been holding the line against an invisible enemy, was being broken by a bully with a government paycheck. A cold, familiar rage began to build in Reaper's chest, a feeling he knew well. It was the same feeling he'd felt in Fallujah, watching injustice take root. He saw her gesture to the local police car that rolled past, the officers inside offering only a shrug. The light turned green. The cars behind him honked. Reaper ignored them. His bike, finally giving into the heat, sputtered, coughed black smoke, and died. Silence. The sudden absence of the engine's roar was deafening. "Damn it," he growled, swinging his leg off the bike. The cars behind him swerved angrily, laying on their horns. Mrs. Gable, satisfied with her work of crushing a child's spirit, got back in her van, shooting Reaper a look of pure disgust. "Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it?" she sneered through her open window before pulling away, leaving Leo sobbing over his card table. Reaper was stranded, stuck. He kicked the starter. Nothing. He kicked it again, his 250-pound frame putting all its weight into it. The engine was flooded. The heat was unbearable. He was a giant, tattooed, leather-clad beast, defeated by the sun and a faulty carburetor. He let out a roar of frustration, pulling off his sunglasses to wipe the sweat from his eyes. He felt the small, terrified gaze on him. The boy, Leo, had stopped crying, his own misery momentarily forgotten, and was staring at the monster on the roadside. The monster who looked hot. Leo didn't see the patches. He didn't see the tattoos or the reputation. He didn't see a Hell's Angel or a threat. In that moment, filtered through the pure, uncorrupted lens of a 9-year-old's heart, he saw a man who was thirsty. He saw a grown-up who looked as defeated as he felt. He saw someone who was hurting. And Leo, whose entire world was crumbling, whose sister was dying, whose parents were broken, found a single, last drop of empathy inside himself. He picked up one of his plastic cups, his hand shaking, and wiped his nose on his sleeve. He dipped the cup into the pitcher. It was lukewarm now, the ice long gone. It was probably the worst lemonade in the state of Ohio, but it was all he had. It was his product, his hope, his entire inventory. It was the currency he was using to try and buy his sister's life. He walked across the cracked pavement, a tiny David approaching a leather-clad Goliath. He walked right up to the massive biker who was glaring at his motorcycle with murderous intent. Leo had to look straight up, craning his neck to see the man's face. Reaper froze. He felt the boy's presence and turned, ready to snarl, ready to tell him to get lost. He stopped. The kid was holding up a cup. Leo's voice was a small, trembling whisper, barely audible over the passing traffic. "Mister," he said, you look really hot." Leo extended his arm, the cup shaking so hard a little lemonade sloshed over the side. This one's on the house." He was offering his only asset, for free, to the scariest man he had ever seen. Time stopped. Reaper stared at the cup. He stared at the boy. This kid, who he had just watched get his soul crushed by a county bureaucrat, a boy trying to raise money for a surgery, was giving him a free drink. Him, Reaper, the man people crossed the street to avoid, the man who represented fear. This child, in an act of impossible, selfless purity, was offering him comfort. It was a kindness so profound, so completely unexpected, that it punched through 2 decades of scar tissue and armor. It hit Reaper square in the chest, knocking the air out of him. He looked down at the boy's tear-streaked, dirt-smudged face. He saw the absolute, terrifying innocence in his eyes. Leo wasn't trying to sell him something. He wasn't afraid. He was just being kind. In Reaper's world, kindness was a transaction. It was a debt. It was a weapon. It was never, ever this. It was never just a gift. This boy with his wobbly table and his magic marker sign was the purest thing Reaper had encountered in his entire God-forsaken life. He had seen men die. He had caused men to die. But he had never seen courage like this. Slowly, as if his hand was moving against its own will, Reaper reached out, his massive, calloused, ink-stained hand, scarred from 1,000 bar fights and engine repairs, dwarfed the small plastic cup. He took it from Leo. He looked at the cloudy, warm liquid. He looked at the boy. Then he brought the cup to his lips and drained it in one long, respectful swallow. It was the best damn lemonade he'd ever had. It tasted like hope. It tasted like grace. He reached into the pocket of his jeans, past the chain wallet, and pulled out a wadded, greasy $50 bill. "What's your name, kid?" Reaper's voice was like gravel rolling downhill. "Leo," the boy whispered. Reaper knelt, a painful crack coming from his knees, bringing himself down to the boy's level. He looked Leo square in the eyes. He saw the sign again, the misspelled plea for his sister. He pressed the $50 bill into Leo's small, damp hand. "You got more heart than all of them, kid," Reaper said, his voice thick. "You keep fighting. Don't you ever let them see you stop fighting." He closed the boy's fingers over the money. Reaper stood up. He turned back to his bike. He kicked the starter, one time with a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline-fueled rage. The engine roared to life, exploding into a deafening thunder, as if it had been shamed into obedience. The sound was a war cry. He swung his leg over, settled into the seat, and gave the throttle a sharp twist. Brap! He looked back at Leo, who was staring at the $50 in his hand as if it were a bar of gold. Reaper gave the boy a single sharp nod. It was a promise. Then he released the clutch, and with a scream of rubber on asphalt, he was gone, a black comet disappearing into the heat. Mrs. Deidre Gable did not get to her position by accepting defeat. She was a woman fueled by small-town spite, and her power, though limited, was absolute within her small kingdom. She had seen the exchange. She saw that greaseball, that tattooed deviant, hand the boy money. It wasn't a donation. It was a transaction, a $50 middle finger aimed directly at her authority. This wasn't about a zoning ordinance anymore. This was about respect. This was about a 9-year-old boy and a Hell's Angel forming an alliance to defy her. The law in her hands was not a shield for the public. It was a hammer, and she was about to swing it. Her face, a tight mask of indignation, turned a blotchy red as she cranked the wheel of her county van. She found Leo exactly where she'd left him, only this time, the boy's despair was gone. That $50 miracle had refueled his impossible crusade. He had used the money, gone back to the store, and returned with a brand new, gleaming glass pitcher. He had a bigger bag of ice, 2 more sleeves of cups, and his hand-drawn sign was reinforced with duct tape as if armored for battle. This, to Mrs. Gable, was not resilience. It was escalation. It was a declaration of war. She pulled the van over, not just parking it, but blocking the sidewalk, the white vehicle serving as a wall. She was done with warnings. She was here to enforce the consequences. She emerged from the van, clipboard in hand, but she didn't write a word. She marched straight to the wobbly card table. Leo, seeing her, felt his blood run cold. "Ma'am, he started. "I warned you, boy," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. And then, in a single violent motion of profound petty cruelty, she kicked the leg of the table. The entire structure collapsed. The new glass pitcher shattered on the concrete, a spray of lemonade and sharp fragments. The money box, a cigar box holding his previous earnings and the change from the 50, flew open, coins scattering like shrapnel across the dirty pavement. The sign snapped in two. Leo just stared, his mouth open, a silent scream trapped in his throat. The sound of the glass shattering was the sound of his hope breaking. "You think you're special?" Gable sneered, standing over the wreckage. "You think you're above the law because you have a sad story?" She nudged a rolling quarter with the toe of her sensible shoe. "This is a residential zone. No commercial activity. Period. Your friend on the motorcycle can't protect you from county ordinances." She was relishing this, drawing power from his terror. She was making an example of him, teaching him his place in a world that she, and people like her, controlled completely. As Leo finally burst into tears, a heartbreaking, gulping sob, Gable delivered the killing blow. "I told you what would happen," she said, finally clicking her pen. She began writing a citation. "This is a $300 fine. It will be mailed to your parents." She tore the ticket from her pad and threw it onto the wet, sticky ground. "And one more thing. I'm making a call to Child Protective Services. We have a name for children left unattended on street corners soliciting strangers. It's called endangerment. Maybe your parents will listen to them." This was no longer about a fine. She was threatening to take him. Leo ran. He left the money, the broken glass, the wagon. He ran the 2 blocks home, bursting through the front door in a state of pure, hysterical panic. Mark and Sarah found him incoherent, gasping for air, trying to explain between sobs about the table, the glass, and the threat of Child Protective Services. The color drained from Sarah's face. Mark, seeing his son utterly broken by a government employee, felt a cold, primal rage he hadn't known he possessed. He grabbed his keys and his phone. "Stay here," he told Sarah. He dialed 911 as he ran to his rust-pocked Ford pickup. He was reporting harassment, vandalism, and threats. 2 Toledo police officers, weary from a long shift in a city full of problems bigger than this, met Mark at the corner. They surveyed the scene. A broken pitcher, some spilled ice. Mrs. Gable was gone. They listened to Mark's furious explanation, their faces impassive. "Sir, I understand you're upset," the older one, Officer Riley, said, his voice flat. "But Mrs. Gable is the county code enforcer. She has the jurisdiction to shut down unlicensed vendors. It's her job. We can't arrest her for doing her job." They saw a mess. They didn't see the crime. They saw a bureaucratic dispute, not the crushing of a child's soul. "She kicked it. She smashed it. She threatened my family," Mark yelled, his voice cracking. The younger officer chimed in, adjusting his belt. "Look, Mr. Davis, that's a he said, she said situation. You're saying she kicked it. She's gonna say it. Was unstable and fell when she went to inspect it. Who do you think the judge is gonna believe? You or a county official. He sighed. Look, we'll file a report, but honestly, it's not going to go anywhere. Our hands are tied on this. It's a civil matter, not a criminal one. The dismissal was total. Officer Riley put his hand on Mark's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a shove. Between you and me, pal, he said, lowering his voice. She's probably right. This ain't the kind of neighborhood you should be leaving your 9-year-old out in alone anyway. You saw that biker here earlier. This corner attracts elements. They had done it. They had expertly, efficiently shifted the blame from the armored fist of the state to the parents who were just trying to survive. Leo wasn't the victim. He was the liability. The family wasn't oppressed. They were negligent. Mark, choking on his own helplessness, drove to the county government building. His hands were white on the steering wheel, his truck engine knocking in protest. He stormed into the beige linoleum-floored lobby, demanding to speak to Deidre Gable's supervisor. The receptionist, a woman chewing gum behind a wall of plexiglass, didn't even look up from her computer monitor. You'll have to file a formal complaint, she recited, her voice a monotone drone. The forms are on the rack by the door. The supervisor, Mr. Allen, is in a budget meeting until Thursday. Thursday. It was Tuesday. A budget meeting? My son was just threatened by one of your employees. Mark slammed his hand on the counter. The receptionist finally looked up, her eyes dead. Sir, if you raise your voice, I'll have to call security. Your options are to file the complaint form or leave. Once filed, the processing period is 30 to 60 business days. Business days. Mark stared at her. He looked at the rack. Form 3B. Citizen grievance against a county official. It was 4 pages long, printed on carbon, copy paper. It was a labyrinth designed to make you give up. The system wasn't just broken. It was designed to be this way. While Mark was hitting the bureaucratic wall, Sarah was living a different nightmare. The threat of CPS had terrified her. She thought, I'll call them first. I'll explain. They'll understand. It was the worst mistake she could have made. She called the county's Child and Family Services hotline, her voice trembling, trying to explain the lemonade stand, Maya's surgery, the $40,000. She was trying to prove she was a good mother. The woman on the other end of the line was cold, professional, and taking notes. She wasn't hearing a mother's love. She was checking boxes. So, let me clarify, Mrs. Davis. The caseworker's voice was sharp. You and your husband are aware that your 9-year-old son is soliciting money from strangers on a public street corner? Sarah stammered. No, it's not like that. It's a lemonade stand. It's for his sister. The caseworker cut her off. Is he supervised by an adult at all times? Well, I check on him from the window, but, ma'am, we will have to open an investigative file. We'll be sending a caseworker to your home within 48 hours to assess the living situation. Sarah hung up the phone, her hand shaking so violently she dropped the receiver. This is the moment, isn't it? The one where you realize you're truly, completely alone. The moment you realize all the systems you were told would protect you. The police, the government, the social safety nets, are not safety nets at all. They are a spider's web, and the Davis family was now caught. The police had blamed them, the county government had ignored them, and the social workers called for help were now investigating them for neglect. They were being punished for being poor, for being desperate, and for daring to fight back. They were good people, crushed by a machine that runs on indifference. That night, the Davis house was a tomb. The fight was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating dread. Leo was in his room, curled in a ball, refusing to speak. He believed in his 9-year-old heart that this was all his fault. His attempt to be a hero had brought ruin. He had cost his parents $300 they didn't have. He had brought the kid takers to their door. Mark and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the unpaid medical bills piled between them, the CPS threat hanging over their heads like a guillotine. They weren't just defeated, they were erased. The system had won, but the system, for all its power, has a weakness. It's blind. It doesn't see the quiet observers, the people in the margins. It didn't see Mr. Henderson, 2 houses down, an old-timer, a Vietnam vet who spent most of his days on his porch, watching the neighborhood. He had seen it all. He saw Gable's van. He saw her kick the table. He saw the glass fly. He saw the police officers shrug their shoulders and leave. He saw Mark return from City Hall, his face ashen, a defeated soldier returning from a lost battle. Henderson had seen this before. He knew this kind of tyranny. Henderson, a man who hadn't made a phone call in anger in 20 years, went inside. He didn't call the cops. He didn't call the mayor. He knew those lines were dead. He opened an old, battered address book and found a number for a bar on the industrial side of town, a place called The Pit. It was the local Hells Angels clubhouse. He knew Reaper drank there. He dialed the number on his rotary phone. The phone was answered on the 3rd ring with a gruff, "Yeah, I need to talk to Padre or Reaper." Henderson said, his voice quiet. Reaper was in the back, cleaning his carb, when the phone was handed to him. "Who's this?" he grunted. "You don't know me." Henderson's voice crackled. "I live on Elm. I saw you today, with the kid, the lemonade kid." Reaper went still. "What about him?" "She came back," Henderson said. "The woman in the van. She came back after you left. She smashed his stand, kicked it over, broke everything, told him she was calling CPS on his folks." A dead, heavy silence filled the line. "The cops? They did nothing. They blamed the parents. The kid? He's done. She broke him. I thought you should know." He hung up. Reaper hung up the phone. The click of the receiver dropping into its cradle was louder than a gunshot in the suddenly silent clubhouse. The jukebox had been cut off mid-song. A game of pool froze the cue ball stationary on the green felt. Every man in the room, men with names like Sledge, Whiskey, and Wreck, stopped. Their eyes were on Reaper. He didn't just hear the words from the old veteran. He felt them. She broke him. It was a violation of a code deeper than any state law. You don't break children. You don't poison innocence. He had given that boy a $50 bill and a pat on the head. He had left a soldier on the battlefield. He walked through the parted sea of leather, his boots heavy on the plywood floor, straight to the man at the head table. "Padre," he said, and his voice was raw. Padre was the club president, an older man with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who has seen and done it all. He was called Padre not for his holiness, but because he was the father, judge, and executioner of their chapter. "The kid, on Elm, the one with the sister," Reaper said. "The county enforcer. She came back, smashed his stand, called CPS on the family. The cops blamed them." Padre didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply processed the information. The boy, Leo, had shown them respect. He had offered a free cup of lemonade to a man the rest of the world saw as a monster. He had treated them like men, and in their world, that was a debt, a sacred, binding debt. Mrs. Gable hadn't just kicked over a table. She had spat on the club's honor. Padre looked at Reaper, then at the room of 40 waiting men. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. "This," he said, his voice like dry gravel, "is an unacceptable breach of conduct. It requires a response." He stood. He was not a large man, but his presence filled the room. He walked to the old rotary phone on the bar, the one reserved for club business. He picked it up and began to dial. This was the tree. The call went to his vice president, who called his sergeants, who called their men. The message was simple, cryptic, and carried the weight of an iron gavel. Elm and Third, the boy with the sign. Code, Limonada. It was not a request, it was a summons. "And," Padre added, his voice dropping, "bring your wallets, full ones, and empty your damn club safe, Reaper. All of it. We're making a withdrawal." The signal spread like fire in a dry forest. It echoed across cell towers, from the industrial flatlands of Toledo to the suburbs of Perrysburg. In garages, men dropped wrenches. In bars, they left half-finished beers. At construction sites, they walked off the job. Wives, long accustomed to these sudden, urgent calls, just nodded, handing their husbands their cuts. This was not a call to war. It was a call to church. It was a mobilization of the forgotten for the forsaken. They were the men the system had also failed. The veterans, the ex-cons, the blue-collar workers. They knew this fight. They were this fight. Back at the Davis house, the silence was a sickness. Mark and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills, the useless police report number, the impending arrival of a CPS caseworker. They were finished. They had fought the machine and been ground into dust. Leo was in his room, his face buried in his pillow, convinced he had destroyed his family. The air was thick with the humid, oppressive stillness of a Midwest summer night. And then it came. Not a sound at first, a vibration, a low, distant hum in the pit of the stomach. Mark looked up from the table, his eyes dead. "Thunder," he whispered. Sarah shook her head. The vibration wasn't in the sky. It was in the ground. It was in the pipes. The windows began to rattle, a low, persistent hum. It was growing, deeper, louder. It was rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of 1,000 iron hearts beating in unison. It was the sound of the apocalypse approaching at 40 miles per hour. It was the sound of judgment. Leo sat up in his bed, the fear of the CPS worker replaced by a new alien terror. The neighbors saw it first. Curtains twitched. Mr. Henderson, the vet who made the call, stepped onto his porch. He saw the first headlight turn onto Elm Street, then another, and another. They came in a perfect 2x2 formation, like a cavalry charge. It wasn't a group, it was an army, a river of chrome and black steel, flooding the quiet residential street. The sound was no longer a rumble. It was a deafening, overwhelming roar, a wall of noise that drowned out every other sound in the world. The ground was shaking. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. They kept coming. It wasn't 40, it wasn't 80, it was hundreds. Chapters from Cleveland, Detroit, Fort Wayne. The code Limonada had spread. They had ridden for hours. They filled the street end to end, blocking it completely. They formed a perimeter, a fortress of steel and leather around the entire block. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and hot metal. The neighborhood, which had been silent in its judgment of the Davis family, was now silent in its terror. They had locked their doors. They had hidden their kids. The elements Officer Riley had warned about were here, and right on cue, 2 cars appeared, trapped at the new iron blockade. The first was Officer Riley's patrol car. The second was the White County van. Mrs. Deidre Gable had returned, and as promised, she had brought the CPS caseworker with her to finalize the removal of Leo. She stepped out of her van, her face a mask of furious indignation, ready to have the police clear the riffraff. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. "This is an illegal assembly. Officer, arrest these people." Officer Riley, his hand nervously on his sidearm, looked at the sea of leather vests. He saw patches he recognized. Hell's Angels, outlaws, pagans. This was not a crowd to be dispersed. This was an occupying force. He was catastrophically, comically outgunned. "Ma'am, I suggest you get back in your vehicle," he said, his voice barely a whisper. But Gable was marching forward, brandishing her clipboard like a weapon, straight toward the line of bikers. She was about to learn the difference between bureaucratic power and real power. The engines cut, all at once, hundreds of motors silenced by a single hand signal from Padre. The sudden, absolute quiet was more menacing than the noise. It was a vacuum. The only sound was the click-clack of Gable's sensible shoes on the asphalt. The bikers just watched. They were giants, impassive, leather-clad statues. They formed a perfect wall, a human shield, separating the county van from the Davis house. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just were. They were the physical manifestation of a moral line being drawn. Padre and Reaper emerged from the line. They walked past Gable as if she were a piece of trash on the sidewalk. They did not acknowledge her. They did not acknowledge the police. They walked straight up the cracked pathway to the Davis family's front door. Mark and Sarah, who had been watching through the blinds, paralyzed with fear, saw the 2 men approaching. They looked like death, arriving to collect a debt. Padre, his face a roadmap of hard miles, raised a gloved fist and knocked. A polite, gentle, rhythmic knock. Knock, knock, knock. Mark opened the door, shaking. He was ready to beg, to fight, to do anything. "Mr. Davis?" Padre's voice was quiet, respectful. "My name is Padre. We're associates of young Leo." He gestured back to the wreckage of the stand on the sidewalk. "We heard you had some lemonade that needed to be sold." Mark just stared, uncomprehending. "What?" Reaper stepped forward. He took off his helmet. It was overflowing with cash. Wadded 20s, 50s, hundreds. "This," Reaper said, his voice thick, "is from the clubhouse. A down payment." He dumped the mountain of money at Mark's feet. Then the line broke, but it didn't break into chaos. It formed a new line, a single file procession, starting from the street and ending at the porch. One by one, a parade of the most terrifying men in Ohio walked up to the house. Each one took off his helmet or pulled a thick envelope from his cut. They didn't say a word. They just dropped their contributions. It wasn't a donation. It was a tithe. It was payment for the cup of lemonade Leo had given their brother. It was a flood, a tidal wave of cash piling up on the welcome mat. If you believe that the real community, the real family, is the one that shows up when the world turns its back, smash that like button right now. Your engagement proves that this kind of loyalty is what we're all searching for. This wasn't a fundraiser. It was a statement. The pile of money grew, a monument to their collective will. It was 10,000, 20. It was past the 40,000. The sound of the money hitting the porch was the only sound on the street. It was the sound of a miracle, delivered by the hands of society's monsters. Mrs. Gable was watching, her face a grotesque mask of confusion and impotence. Her authority was gone. It had evaporated. The piece of paper in her hand was worthless. She shrieked at Officer Riley, "Do something! This is extortion! It's gang activity!" Riley, who was wisely staying near his car, just shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "I see a group of American citizens making a charitable donation to a family in need. I don't see any crime here. In fact, it looks like a local feel-good story to me." Right on cue, a Channel 13 news van, tipped off by the club, pulled up behind the police car. The flash of the camera hit Gable's face. She was trapped. She was now the villain in a story about a sick child and her guardian angels. The CPS worker, a young woman who looked horrified, was already backing away, getting into her own car. I think this file is a mistake," she stammered. "There's clearly community support here." Gable was surrounded, hemmed in by a wall of leather. a pile of cash, and the lens of the media. Her power, built on the fear of the helpless, was useless against a force that feared nothing. Leo, drawn by the silence, crept out of his room. He walked to the front door, hiding behind his father's legs. He peeked out. He saw Reaper. He saw the mountain of money, bigger than he could have dreamed. He saw the street, filled with hundreds of men, all of them looking on him. They weren't scowling. They weren't angry. When they saw him, the tiny 9-year-old soldier, a murmur went through the crowd, and then one by one they started to clap. A slow, rhythmic, powerful applause. It was a hero's welcome. Padre turned to Leo. He knelt, wincing, bringing himself down to the boy's eye level, just as Reaper had done. He removed his sunglasses. His eyes were clear and kind. "We heard," Padre said, his voice soft, "that you were a man of honor, that you gave a drink to a thirsty brother." He pointed to the crowd. "We are your family now, son, and we don't let anyone mess with our family. You understand?" Leo, his eyes wide, looked at the pile of money, at the army on his lawn, and for the first time in months, he nodded. The tears came, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. The thunder had arrived. The applause subsided, replaced by the crisp, rustling sound of Mark and Sarah, their hands shaking, counting the offering. The pile on the porch wasn't just $40,000. It was $57,300, enough for the dye, surgery, the follow-up care, and the rent for 6 months. It was a ludicrous, impossible sum, donated in $10 bills and wadded hundreds. Deidre Gable, her face the color of spoiled milk, stood frozen. The Channel 13 cameraman was right in her face, the light on, broadcasting her humiliation live. "Ma'am," the reporter asked, "what's the county's official response to this incredible community outpouring for a boy you were finding?" Gable's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Her clipboard, the symbol of her power, slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the pavement. Her reign of petty terror was over, executed by 1,000 acts of kindness. Officer Riley, seeing the camera and the mountain of cash, immediately shifted into community relations mode. He walked over to Mark, his hat in his hand. "Sir," he said, his voice now dripping with respect, "I've torn up that citation, and I've personally spoken to the CPS dispatcher. It was a data entry error, a misunderstanding. The file is closed." The young caseworker, who had been hiding by her car, was already gone, having fled the scene. The system, in all its bureaucratic might, had just met an older, more primal system. The tribe had won. The police, the county, the child services, they folded instantly when confronted by a force that didn't care about their forms, their jurisdiction, or their threats. They had no power here. But Padre wasn't finished. The money was just the opening act. He turned to the crowd of bikers, his voice now a command. "Rec, whiskey, you're on supplies. Sledge, you and the prospects, I see a broken table." A new kind of energy surged through the men. This was not a mob. It was a disciplined work crew. 2 bikers roared off, their back tires smoking, and returned 20 minutes later from the local grocery store, their saddlebags overflowing. They weren't just bringing snacks. They were bringing groceries, bags and bags of milk, bread, meat, pasta. They formed a chain, stocking the Davis family's bare pantry and refrigerator until the doors wouldn't close. They were restoring the family's dignity, 1 bag of rice at a time. Sledge, a man who looked like he could punch through a brick wall, and probably had, went to the wreckage of the lemonade stand. He examined the broken card table with disgust. "Unacceptable," he grunted. He and 2 other men vanished into the alley. They returned with lumber, tools, and a can of red paint. In less than an hour, under the stunned gaze of the neighborhood, they built a new stand. It wasn't a wobbly card table. It was a fortress. Solid 4x4 legs, a smooth plywood top, and a fresh coat of bright, defiant red paint. They built it on the exact same corner, a permanent monument to the boy's courage and a warning to anyone who might try to knock it down again. And the neighbors, they watched, from behind their curtains, through the cracks in their blinds. They had seen Leo on that corner for days. They had seen him fried by the sun, ignored by the traffic. They had heard his sister was sick, and they had done nothing. They had left a 9-year-old to fight a dragon with a squirt gun. Now their street was occupied by an army of men they had always feared, and those men were doing the job the community had failed to do. They were acting as neighbors. The shame was a palpable, bitter taste in their mouths. They weren't afraid of the bikers anymore. They were afraid of what the bikers' presence said about them. The work was done. The pantry was full. The bill was paid. The stand was rebuilt. The bikers were mounting up, their engines rumbling back to life, a new, gentler thunder. Padre and Reaper approached Leo, who was standing on his porch, No longer a victim, but the bewildered king of Elm Street. Padre held something black in his hands. "You know," Padre said, his voice low, "in our world we live by a code. Honor, loyalty, respect. You showed us all three. You showed it to a brother when he was down. That's a debt that can't be paid with just money." He looked at Mark and Sarah. A silent question. They nodded, their eyes full of tears. Reaper stepped forward, holding a small, brand-new, sleeveless leather vest. A cut. It was identical to theirs, only it was 9-year-old sized. It had no club patches on the back, but on the front, over the heart, was a single, custom-stitched patch. It didn't say Hell's Angels. It said Leo, and under it a new patch, Little Brother. Reaper knelt and gently, with the reverence of a knighting ceremony, helped Leo put it on. "Your family now, kid," Reaper growled, his voice thick with emotion. "You ever need anything, you call us. We will come. We will always come." Leo just hugged the man, burying his face in the leather, smelling the gasoline and freedom. Mark and Sarah watched their son, a boy who had been broken just hours before, now standing tall, armored, in the protection of the 1%ers. The $57,000 was a miracle. But this was salvation. This was the moment they realized they weren't alone. They weren't just a number in a broken system. They were, as Reaper said, family. They had an army at their back, an army that had mobilized over a cup of warm lemonade. The suffocating fear that had choked their home for months finally, definitively, broke. Sarah was crying, but for the first time, her tears weren't for Maya's future. They were for Leo's present. Padre gave the signal. The roar of hundreds of V-twin engines exploded. A single, unified blast of sound that was a promise and a warning. But they didn't just leave. One by one, each biker rode past the new red lemonade stand. And one by one, each man stopped, reached into his pocket, and placed a $1 bill on the counter. A ceremonial first purchase. They were paying their respects, not just to Leo, but to the symbol he had created. They were christening the new church on the corner of Elm and 3rd. It was the most intimidating, beautiful, and respectful traffic jam in the history of Ohio. Then, as one, the river of steel turned and flowed back toward the highway. They left the same way they came, a disciplined, thundering column of chrome, leaving behind a full pantry, a paid-for surgery, a humiliated bureaucrat, a shamed neighborhood, and a little boy in a new leather vest. They left behind a family they had pulled back from the brink, wrapping them in a blanket of loyalty that was stronger than any bank vault. They didn't wait for thanks. They didn't pose for the cameras. The job was done. Justice, the real kind, had been served, not from a gavel, but from the saddle of a Harley. You see, we've been taught to fear the wrong monsters. We're taught to fear the tattoos, the leather, the noise. We're told to trust the suits, the clipboards, the uniforms. But today, the suit and the uniform told a dying family, no. They blamed the victim. They threatened the innocent. And the monsters? The monsters brought a miracle. They reminded us that courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's not even about fighting your own battles. Courage is about having the purity to offer a free drink to a thirsty stranger, and having the honor to repay that kindness 1,000 times over. That's the code. It's not written in any law book, but it's etched onto the hearts of the forgotten. It's the code of the road. Share this video. Share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. They don't always wear capes or badges. Sometimes, as Leo learned, they wear leather, and they ride in on a wave of thunder, ready to fight for the family they choose. Until next time, stay strong and look out for your brothers.